I asked my friend Kelly to help me learn how to use Twitter.
Okay, so tips for starting Twitter would be jump online and make yourself an account, which is pretty easy to do. The website will step you through it. And if I had one tip for the start, it would be to pick yourself a short username, because you'll only have 140 characters per tweet. And if you want other people to retweet you or to have a conversation with you, and you've got a really huge long name, that's going to take up some character space. So, 8 to 10 characters at the most is probably a good guide. And that doesn't have to be your real name. It could be something a little bit more innocuous or hard to identify, and you can change it later on. It just depends if you want to build up your own personal online identity from the start, or whether you want it to be a bit more anonymous. So that would be tip number one. Tip number two would be follow some people, and not just like 2 people, but follow about 20 or 30 at least people. And that doesn't have to be individuals. If you're a teacher, you might follow other teachers, or education publishers or something like that. But you can follow news outlets. So if you're someone who likes to read newspapers or listen to the news, you might follow ABC News or the Brisbane Times, Sydney Morning Herald. They're on Twitter as well. But without following a good bank of people, you won't get the point. You log on and you think, oh, what's on Twitter today? And the answer will be not very much, because not everyone tweets all the time. So unless you've got a solid bank of people to watch, then you won't have enough of a stream.
Kelly, how can people manage the different audiences knowing that anyone can read their tweets?
If you put something up on Twitter, it's out there to a public audience. Now, on one hand, that audience might not be too public, because you're just one of a bazillion million people on Twitter saying many, many things every day. So the audience might not be as big as you're imagining or being scared of. But the potential audience is anyone. And so what do you do there? I think the rule of better to be safe than sorry, and better to be cautious than to, put it all out there is good. So a good rule of thumb with any kind of online writing is that you don't write anything that you wouldn't be comfortable for your boss to see. And that's even on things like Facebook, where you think it's only your friends. Anyone can take a screenshot of that and share it. So for me, it's a good standard rule for all online writing that would then apply to the Twitter world as well. For my context, I work in a teaching space, so I also have to be conscious of not just my boss, but my students could read what I say. So it does mean that you moderate the kinds of things that you would say in the public space. You wouldn't get on and complain about what an awful day you had necessarily, when that audience could be reading your tweets and feeling some feelings about that. So just exercising a little bit of caution, but if it's something you'd be prepared to stand up for in a conversation with someone, then say it, because you can stand up for that as well. The last tip I'd probably give is, if you are someone who's really nervous about putting your personal identity out there, and you want to experiment with writing some tweets, but you don't want anyone to see them yet, which you will eventually change, but if you just wanted to kind of play in the sandpit for a while, you can protect your account. So you can turn your tweets onto what's called protected mode. And it means that only people who you've said, yep, it's okay, you can follow me, only they can see your tweets, no one else can. In the long term, I'd suggest turning that off, because unless people can see your work, then they're not going to interact with you very much. But for that beginning part, if you're feeling nervous, just protect them, and no one will get to see them unless you say it's okay.
I know it's probably one of the questions I asked you, and it's one that gets asked me quite often. People might be convinced now, having heard your story, of how beneficial it is. How do you find the time to tweet?
So how do people find the time to tweet? I could be bossy and say, you ought to make the time because it's so valuable. But the truth is, I don't even have to be that bossy. The thing with Twitter that I hear all the time in workshops, and it's not just Twitter, it's any kind of social media, is people say, I don't want another thing I have to check. I've heard that so many times. And I think when people say that, they imagine that the service is going to be like email, where they have to check it all the time and they have to read every email that comes their way, otherwise they feel like they've neglected it or they've fallen behind. and they have to reply to everything that is relevant to them. But Twitter's not like that. So you could have a routine with yourself where you only dip into it once a week, and you don't have to scroll back through every single tweet in your feed from the last week and read it. You can just start from wherever you jump in, and you let it wash over you like a sea. You know, you don't go to the ocean and get upset that you didn't see the waves from yesterday. So I think be mindful that it only takes up as much time as you actually want to let it take up in your life. But back to the bullying point, once you see the advantages, you'll see that it's time well spent, or time well invested.
Beautiful. Thank you very much, Kelly.